Hi YouTube, thank you for tuning into my channel. Today I'll be reading another romance novel for my series Judging a Book by its First Chapter. I had some technical difficulties yesterday, so this rereading won't have my initial reactions, but I think it'll be good no matter the same. The book is called Lorraine Heath, Beyond Scandal and Desire. And I have a lot of Lorraine Heath. I actually enjoy her old stuff. This is a book from January 2018. And I'm going to read you the first chapter. I'm actually going to read you the whole first chapter. Instead of like 20 pages, it's more like 10 pages. So bear with me. This will be a long video. So I'm going to read the first chapter. I'm ready. Again, the book is called Beyond Scandal and Desire by Lorraine Heath. Chapter 1. London, 1871. Mick Truelove was intimately familiar with the Crimmore Gardens, but as a rule he limited his visits to the later hours when loose women could be had cheaply, cutthroats abounded, decadence flourished, men well into their cups were willing to spill secrets, and those who had once slighted him could be paid back in full. But wandering along the path this early into the night, as twilight was beginning to settle, and in full darkness was but a whispered promise of seduction, made his skin itch and his well-tailored clothing feel far too tight. Decent folk meandered about, enjoying the evening's innocent entertainments, some taking pleasure in doing little more than leisurely strolling through the gardens that the Thames kept lush and green. He couldn't imagine having so few cares, of being so relaxed that his laughter would easily fill the air, although in all fairness, he wasn't known for laughing, at least not with joy. His harsh bark tended to make people wary, especially when it was directed at them. With good reason, it was usually a sign that he was on the verge of claiming his retribution. Why are we following that couple? He'd always known the young beauty on his arm was no fool, but he'd hoped finally satisfying her curiosity about the gardens would have distracted her from his purpose. I know not of what you speak. Liar. With one arm entwined around his, she slapped him with her free hand. He hadn't given any thought to the fact that in escorting her publicly, she might undermine his hard-earned reputation for being the unforgiving sort, although he doubted any of his acquaintances were here at this early hour. An assortment of people have passed in front of us, and you've not given them a withering glance. When someone gets in our way, you stiffen and hurry around them as though they're an obstruction to your goals. You've totally ignored the jugglers and tumblers, no matter how hard they strive to catch your attention. I've deduced your reason for bringing me here was not as a gift for my birthday, as you claim, but because you decided you would be less noticeable with a woman on your arm. You're but a girl, pet. I'm 10 and 7. Old enough to marry. You're not marrying. Someday I will. There's not a bloke alive to whom I'd grant approval to take you as wife. Take you to wife. Isn't that your decision to make? With no father about as your eldest brother, it damn well is. The little brat slapped at his upper arm again. You're trying to distract me so I won't pester you with my questions. I won't fall for it. The couple ahead stopped to listen to a small orchestra playing a soft yet somber tune. Stealing as well, he glanced down in order to see his sister's triumphant expression as he growled. You're too smart by half. With the praise, she squeezed his arm and smiled brightly. Tell me everything about them. Shh, keep your voice low. He didn't need someone easing by them to hear his words, to know he did indeed have a keen interest in the couple. I will, she whispered. Who are they? He's the Earl of Kipwick, son to the Duke of Headley, a title he will one day hold. Something about him seems familiar. Can't we move to the other side of them so I can see him more clearly? No, not yet anyway. He had no desire for her to examine the Earl too closely to figure out precisely why he had a keen interest in this particular lord. Do I know him? I doubt it. He doesn't exactly frequent your circles. Does he frequent yours? He will, eventually. And the woman on his arm? Tell me what you know of her. Because she'd only recently come to his attention, he didn't yet possess a great deal of information about her. But that would change in time. If his plan went accordingly, she'd eagerly fill in the particulars. She's Lady Aslam Hastings, daughter to the Earl of Eames. Although she's the Duke of Headley's ward since her parents died when she was a girl. Sorrow washed over his sister's face. She was far too sensitive for a world in which she lived. Then she's an orphan, like you. She was nothing like him. No one was like him. Do you know how her parents died? Fancy asked, sadness woven through her curiosity in her voice. Perhaps because she'd never known her own father, had always referred to herself as a half orphan, a much kinder term than the one attributed to him. Not yet, but eventually he would know every small detail about her. Her likes, her dislikes, her dreams, her fears, her hopes, her worries. She's rather pretty. I always think when someone is comely, she, or he for that matter, is immune to misfortune. No one is immune to misfortune. The couple began strolling off, obviously having grown bored with the musicale. Fancy didn't hesitate when Mick started walking again, quickening his pace to keep them within sight as they entered an area where the crowds thickened and more entertainers sought to earn their keep, presenting small performances, hoping a coin or two would be tossed their way. So why are we following them? Fancy asked. I'm seeking an opportunity to make the Earl's acquaintance. To what purpose? I intend to take from him everything he holds dear, including the lady at his side. And then there's a little break in the text, but we're still in chapter 1. With her arm snugly entwined around the Earls of Kipwick's, Lady Aslan Hastings couldn't shake off the ominous sensation that she was being watched. But then, if she were honest, she always felt under scrutiny. Perhaps it was because of her overly protective guardians or all the dire warnings about the dangers lurking about in the world that the Duchess of Headley continually cast her way. Or the fact that the Duchess never left the residence and encouraged Aslan to follow her example by staying within Headley Hall. Except Aslan longed for more. The independence afforded those who weren't expected to make a suitable match. The carefree moments enjoyed by those not shackled by duty. The excitement offered within the shadows of the night. Those very shadows were falling rapidly and deepening now. The occasional street lamp was being lit, but the dim light was a little match for the darkness easing in around her. She was hoping to convince Kip to stay within the gardens long past the time proper folks did. She wanted to catch a glimpse of the naughty undertakings that had been alluded to in the newspaper articles and gossip rags she read when no one was keeping a watchful eye over her. They hadn't gone into great detail, only enough to titillate the imagination. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on one's perspective, Aslan had always possessed a rather active and creative imagination. She assumes the music that filled the air after 10 o'clock was not something found among her music sheets, nor would her fingertips be allowed to coax it forth from ivory keys. The gowns worn by the ladies who strolled with the gents would reveal a good deal more than the hint of a bosom. The women would certainly be snuggled against their escort's side, not walking along as she was with her hand merely resting on her escort's arm as lightly as a butterfly might settle upon a rose petal. There would be nothing proper, nothing decent in the other lady's actions. But there, her imagination ground to a halt because she couldn't quite envision what the indecent activities might entail. Might a gentleman press his lips to her bared shoulder? Might he nuzzle her neck? And what would that feel like? For all of Kip's interest in her, he'd never been untoward. Untoward. Strange word. Never even tried to steal a kiss. He respected her on her for his baser instincts, to ensure she came from to the marriage bed untouched, which the Duchess assured her was how it should be between a man and a woman if he truly cared for her. Only the most morally inept would seek to take advantage of a lady, would seek to seduce her outside the bonds of marriage. Aslan didn't want to admit what it said about her own morals, that she was rather hoping tonight Kit might ask for permission to place his lips against hers, to remove the glove and touch her cheek, to whisper sweet, passionate words in her ear. What? She was all of 20 and had never been kissed. Not that she knew any not yet betrothed maiden who had been. Ladies in her position were to guard their virtue and be above reproach at all times. Still, there were moments when being morally upright chafed. One could flirt innocently, but was never to engage in any questionable action. Buttons were to remain buttoned, lace and skirt hems hiding ankles. She wasn't about to place herself in a compromising position, but she did often wonder if Kip found all the rules as bothersome as she did, if he yearned to do more than simply stroll along beside her. Guilt pricked her conscience because she should be grateful he was such a considerate, upstanding beau, so she never had to ward off any unwelcome advances. I hear the siren call of a soprano, Kip said, suddenly placing his hand over hers, where it rested on his arms and squeezing ever so slightly. Shall we head in that direction? If you like. He glanced down on her while the shadows were moving in, so his hat cast shade over his face. She could still make out his handsome features. He'd inherited his father's brilliant blue eyes, thick black hair, and the distinctive cleft in his chin. It had fascinated her as a child, and she'd often poked her finger into it, especially when she caught him sleeping. It had become more pronounced as he aged and left no doubt he was indeed his father's heir. Not that anyone would doubt it, really. The Duke and Duchess were devoted to each other, so much so that at times it was as though no one existed beyond them. Are you not enjoying yourself? He asked. Is there something else you'd rather see? Not anything she could voice aloud without gaining a disapproving glare from him, so she kept her thoughts to herself as she was wont to do and smiled up at him. I am indeed having a jolly good time. It's just that it's a bit tamer than I was expecting. It had taken her weeks of cajoling to get him to bring her, and she unlikely would knew it unlikely he would escort her here again. The Duchess had been vehemently opposed to the outing, fearing it would place her ward in some sort of danger. Kip had spent a good deal of dinner the evening before convincing his mother that he'd keep Aslan safe. She didn't know if she'd ever cared for him more than she did at the moment when he fought to give her something she wanted. And even in Eckremore, while she was enjoying it, she couldn't help feeling something was missing. Have you ever been to the gardens when it's not quite so cultured? A gentleman does not speak of activities that are not suitable for a young lady's ears to hear. But he had no such concerns regarding an old lady's ears. She could hardly wait until she was deemed ancient enough to be privy to such knowledge presently denied her. So you have. Rolling his eyes, he sighed with aspiration. I may. Unexpectedly, he was lurching forward, arms windmilling, striving to catch his balance as his hat went flying. To stop herself from tumbling after him, she quickly released her hold on him. Hearing a feminine gasp, she glanced over her shoulder to see a young woman wearing a horrified expression, her eyes wide open, her hands pressed to her gaping mouth. Dear sir, my sincerest apologies. I was so caught up in observing my surroundings that I wasn't watching where I was going. Pray tell me I did no damage to you. Reaching down, Kip snatched up his hat and flicked his fingers over to remove any dirt. She'd expected him to immediately plant it on top of his head. Instead, he stilled, perhaps finally getting a clear look at the young woman before him. She was a girl, really. Younger than Aslan, but her eyes, a strange golden hue that reminded her of a cat's, spoke volumes, hinting at a life that was not without challenges. In spite of her lovely lilac frock and beribboned bonnet, she gave it the impression she'd not always been accustomed to such comforts. No harm done, miss. He dragged out the word as though a part of it was absent and he was seeking the lost piece. Miss Fancy Truelove. Fancy? Unusual name. My mum chose it, hoping I would grow up to marry a fancy man, live in a fancy house, and have fancy things. So far, her hopes have been dashed, but I'm not one to give up on dreams so easily. And you, sir? May I inquire regarding your name? Lord Kipwick. Oh, my word. Paling, she courtesied deeply, elegantly. My lord, please forgive my utter and despicable clumsiness. Easily forgiven when no harm was done. My companion and I were equally engrossed in the festivity this evening. Lady Aslan hastened, allow me to introduce Miss Truelove. It's indeed a pleasure, Aslan said, fighting to hide her surprise that Kip would go to such lengths to introduce her to a commoner. My lady, the girl courtesied again. It was a proper curtsy. Aslan would wager she'd had lessons. Her mother was depending on more than her name to give her that fancy life. I hope I didn't ruin your outing. My brother's always telling me I must slow down, but there is so much to see. I fear missing out on something wonderful and get quite lost in the frivolities. She turned slightly. Don't I, Mick? You do indeed. The deep voice sent a shimmer of awareness through Aslan, and she found herself staring at the man who approached as quietly as fog, rolling in through the encroaching darkness as though he were at once swallowed by it and master of it. She knew without a doubt he was the sort who prowled these environs after the good folk were safely tucked away in their beds. He was well dressed, his clothing of the finest cloth and the shiniest of buttons. She suspected he had a personal tailor because his black coat rested comfortably over his broad shoulders. His midnight locks were unfashionably long, curling along his collar. His thick beard was evenly trimmed, and she was rather certain he gave it great care. He gave it great care. But it was his dark eyes that held her ensnared. There was a somberness, a solemnity to them. His gaze landed on her like a physical presence. Mick, allow me to introduce you to Lord Kipwick and Lady Aslan. I believe, Fancy, he said in a raspy voice that indicated he might have spent a good deal of his life shouting, that in proper circles I am to be introduced to them. Of course, I suppose I should have paid more attention during etiquette classes, but the teacher would drone on and on incessantly. I fear I grew quickly bored and wasted your coin while at it. We don't have to be so formal, Kip said quickly. Uncharacteristically doing away with customs he generally followed as though they were the dictate of a divine being. Based on the conversation with Miss Truelove thus far, I assume you're Mick Truelove? Aslan fought to hide her shock that Kip would know of this man. This creature of the night, this commoner. Even more stunned that he appeared to be encouraging a discourse with someone beneath him, Kip, like most of the aristocracy, tended to lord his position over those who weren't quite up to snuff. The gentleman, in a grand gesture, swept his hat from his head. I am indeed pleased to make your acquaintance, my lord, my lady. I've heard of you, my lord. I've heard of you, Mr. Truelove. Aslan wondered how he knew of the gentleman, with what things Mick Truelove might have done that had brought him to Kip's attention. Nothing good, she suspected. Nothing good, I suspect. She nearly gasped as he gave voice to her exact thoughts. She did hope they weren't reflected in her face, that the man wasn't aware that while he had piqued her curiosity, she didn't quite trust him. Or perhaps it was that she didn't trust herself. Because if she were honest, he intrigued every inch of her being. She'd never before met anyone with such a majestic bearing, as though he ruled over everything upon which he gazed. He had a commanding presence that was both unsettling and thrilling. On the contrary, I hear you have a nose for helping men make fortunes. He lifted his shoulder, ducked his head in a way that would appear humble in most men, but she sensed he didn't have a modest bone in that marvelously tall, broad-shouldered body of his. There was an uncivilized aspect to him that had her most feminine parts quivering shamefully. He'd never had such a blatant physical reaction to a man. She wanted to run her fingers over his beard to see if it felt as soft and luxurious as it looked, even as she had a strong urge to dash off and protect herself, as the Duchess had warned her far too many times, was the appropriate response when confronted by a dangerous man. Instinctually, she knew he was dangerous, very dangerous indeed, in ways she'd never even considered a man might be perilous. Sometimes our endeavors meet with financial success, he said. Few men boast about the times when they don't. Please, let's not get into business, Miss Truelove lamented. The fireworks will be filling the skies soon. I've heard they're marvelous, and this will be my first time to see them. I don't want to miss out on a single burst. My lord, you wouldn't happen to know the best place for viewing them, would you? Indeed, I would. With gloved hands clasped before her, Miss Truelove hopped up to him as though she were a rambunctious puppy who had just divined who held a treat. Would you be so kind as to show me? I'd be delighted to have that honor. If you've never seen them before, you must view them from the best advantage. And he would go with them. This man who merely watched her as though striving to uncover every facet of her. She was quite certain she wanted him near. Something told her that she would be safer if he remained behind. She didn't fear that he would strike her or harm her in any way, yet she couldn't quite shake off the sense that this man was laying claim to her. It was a ridiculous notion. She didn't know him. He was a commoner. After tonight, they would never cross paths again, and all her curiosity about him would fade away. Aslan, jerking her head to the side, breaking free of whatever spell Mick Truelove had cast over her, she looked at Kip, surprised to see his hand extended towards her. Shall we? He asked. Yes, of course. She forced herself to move up and place her hand on his arm, when she would have preferred to stand there like a silly goose and study Mick Truelove. She'd never known a man who gave away none of his thoughts or emotions. He didn't seem bothered by his sister's forwardness, but then it wasn't like a paramour dallying with another man. Although most certainly the girl had been flirting, no doubt testing the waters in order to determine if Kit might turn out to be the fancy man her mother wanted for her. But he was spoken for, not formally announced, yet all of London, all of Great Britain for that matter, knew to whom he belonged, whom he would eventually marry, who would become his countess. She was aware of Miss Truelove and her brother following behind them. Once again, she had the strange sensation of being watched. She wanted to look back, to see if his eyes were upon her. Instead, she marched forward, wondering have what she might have done if he had offered her his arm before Kip had. She rather feared she might have taken it. Something about him called to her, drew her in. She didn't understand this attraction, wasn't certain she wanted to. Now, this first chapter is really, really lustrous. And I love Lorraine Heath. I typically love stories where the hero is kind of from the wrong side of the track, a little bit of a commoner. The language is really, really beautiful. The suspense, the tension, everything's there that would make me keep reading until chapter 2. The dynamics are set up beautifully. Everything is just tantalizing. Typically, historical romance don't have any kind of attraction or love language in the first chapter, so this kind of hops the gun. But it's definitely a good one. So this is Beyond Scandal and Desire by Lorraine Heath. It says U.S. Today best-selling author. And below the title it says a Sins for All Seasons novel. So I'm assuming it's part of a series. I typically don't follow series. I typically when I find author I like, I stick with her. So I really enjoyed this book. Thanks for listening to my reading of the first chapter in my recommendation. I'll see you next time. Every Wednesday, Auf Wiedersehen.